Here we go. All right, great. All right. It's November 18th, 2009. I'm Barbara Blake, and I'm talking to Captain David Willis at his home here in Lennoxville. So, Captain David, could you start off by telling me what year you were born and what community did you grow up in?
I was born in 1941, November the 5th, and I grew up on Lennoxville.
Oh, you just had a birthday.
Mm-hmm. Just had a month, 68.
Oh, you're still working.
Still working.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, could you tell me about your early years, how you first got involved in the Menhaden industry?
I started in the Menhaden business when I was in 1958. My grandfather, my uncle, my father was all in it, all my family. And I was real familiar with the boats even before then because my daddy would carry me out when I was little.
Oh.
And it kind of stuck, and I made up my mind my sophomore year in high school. I said, I want to go fishing. I don't want to go to school. Daddy tried to talk me out of it. I said, no, I'm going to play football this fall, and then come spring, I'm going back fishing. So I did. I dropped out of school, which I'm sorry of, and started fishing on the Sea Dog over at Sea and Simon over at West Beaufort. And then the next year we went down to Beaufort Fisheries with my uncle Benny Willis. He was captain. My grandfather Ivy Willis was mate. And that's how I broke into the Menhaden business. And been there ever since then.
Okay. And what was your father's name?
Clarence Willis.
Okay. And what boat did he fish?
My father fished a number of different boats in the Gulf. He fished the Miss Moorhead, the BB Cove, the West Beaufort, the Luce Brothers down in Texas. But most of his career, in his younger years, he went pilot up on Jersey Beach. He worked out of Port Monmouth, New Jersey. He worked out of Crab Island, New Jersey, Lewis, Delaware, and he worked for the Smith Company. And for 25 years he worked for them up on Jersey Beach, one pilot.
Oh, he was pilot?
Yeah, that's how he broke into the business.
Okay.
And then he went in the Gulf, fished a boat. And fishing in the Gulf was pretty tough then without refrigeration. Small boats really couldn't make no great deal of money. So he come back home and started going pilot with Charlie Pittman down here at Beaufort Fisheries. And he stayed there until pilot with him until I got a boat in 1968. And he went pilot with me and retired with me. Stayed with me until he was 62. Come back to Beaufort Fisheries, had a night watchman job, and then Bobby Martin, he needed a pilot on a Gregory Pool, so he fished with him a couple of years.
Really?
Yeah, in his later years. And then he went back to the night watchman job as Bobo got another man. Daddy didn't want to stay on the boats. He was getting old and his eyes was getting bad. So Bobo got another pilot, and that's where he stayed at until he passed away.
Okay.
I guess really I was just, the family was so involved into it. All of them, done it, grandfather, uncles. So I just went in that channel that they went into and just kind of fitted myself in.
Yeah, and I imagine growing up here in Lennoxville with there are 3 factories maybe along here, you were pretty immersed.
Oh yeah. That was the one. The first one that closed was owned by Standard Product, who later on sold to Ampro Fisheries, a company out of Georgia. That was there. And then it was another one in my lifetime next to that, and then Beaufort Fisheries.
Mm-hmm. So did you fish much out of Beaufort?
Oh yeah. Every fall. When we would fish in the Gulf, every fall I'd come home, I would fish in the fall of the year here with Charlie Pittman. He always saved me a job, and I stayed with him until he retired.
Okay.
I guess I growed up on the big boats, on the Lynn Ann. That was my favorite boat.
Uh-huh.
That's where I cut my teeth, was on her. And before I started going off, I would fish in the Seine. I fished in the Seine 3 or 4 years.
Was the Lynn Ann out of Beaufort Fisheries?
She was out of Beaufort Fisheries.
And she was an outside boat,
She was a big boat. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Okay.
She was a converted World War II minesweeper.
Was she wood?
She was wood, correct.
Those old wooden boats.
She lasted a long time. Yeah, we stayed on her until, I don't know what year it was, but she just got to get in such bad shape until Mr. Potter, who was president of Beaufort Fisheries, and that was his personal boat. He bought the Charlie Pittman, which was a steel boat, another World War II small freighter, and he converted her over, and we fished on her for 5 or 6 years before Captain Charlotte retired. His health went bad. And when he stopped fishing in the fall, I stopped too. Things were changing. A lot of the companies were closing down that was in here. And it was kind of hard to get on a boat then because you had just a couple of boats left here at Beaufort Fisheries, and they had their crews.
Yeah, about what year was that when things were changing like that?
It really started dropping off in the late 70s. A couple of plants up West Moorhead, which was Reedville Oil, which is now Omega Protein. Omega Protein bought them out, bought their operation on the bay. And they closed their operation up to Moorhead. Peck Humphrey, he closed his operation up to Moorhead. Robert Taylor, he had a factory up there, and he shut down. Things was, fishing goes through cycles, and it was just one of those cycles that it wasn't many fish.
Right.
So they started scaling back.
Huh. Well, so in your experience in the industry, what are some of the different jobs you've held or positions?
I started at the bottom. I started as a bunt puller. I pulled bunt for 3 years. Graduated to the big job of engine runner, running the first boat engines.
Oh.
Done that for a year, and then the next year I went in the dry boat because I wanted to advance in the business, and you kind of had a ladder you had to climb in. You had to go through different jobs. And in order to go mate, you had to go in a dry boat for a couple 3 years and get some training there. And the difference in the dry boat and being an engine runner was that when daylight come, you had to go up to mast with the mate and captain and look for fish. So that was part of the training.
So you could get a feel for what you're actually looking for.
Right. You had to learn how to pick out the whips and the color. And when you find a place of fish, you come down the mast and you got in your little dry boat, which was about 12 feet long, and you rowed to the place of fish. And you stayed close to it. And the first boats would come out and set on a place of fish, and you directed them to the fish by pointing at them with your oar. It was a very, very interesting job.
Because the dry boat was just a little skiff, right?
It was a very little skiff. And once the boats come around and set, you went right to the bail bunt, and you went right on top of the cork line. And you tied your little boat to the cork line, and then you pulled corks in the boat, some on each side. Always kept it even. That way it made the net fuller, and these fish would go in the webbing, and you stayed there with them corks in the boat until webbing on by hand. It was a lot slower than what it is now with the power blocks.
Oh, yeah.
And as the boats webbed around, you turned your corks loose to the cork puller in the boat. And once they got all the corks out of the boat, you just took your original lines, you turned them loose and just shoved yourself away from the net.
Well, pulling all those corks in that little tiny skiff, did it ever want to tip over?
That was what you had to watch. You could very easily wind up getting wet, especially outside in the ocean. And you had to have everything balanced out. You couldn't turn all the corks loose on one side. You had to turn them loose evenly on each side of the boat. That way the boat didn't get this way onto you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they were very small, very small.
And how were they propelled?
Oh, you rode them. There's no engine whatsoever. You rode them by hand.
The dry boat?
Mm-hmm. Instead of sitting down rowing, you stood up and rowed. Stood up facing the bow. That way you could see the fish. And you rowed to the fish, standing up. And most of the time you would get if the fish was working east, you got ahead of them. So the captain, when he dropped off in the purse boats, he knew that fish was going to the east. So you stayed right up with them, and he knew where to turn and come back. Because a lot of times in the process of getting everybody off the steamer into the purse boats, the captain and mate would lose track of the fish. And they would step ahead of the mast until they would direct you to them until you got your eye on them in the dry boat. Then they would come down and they would make the set. The dry boat was pretty well replaced by the airplane when the planes started. Well, let me backtrack. Even after we used the planes, we still used the dry boats. Because a lot of times the plane would be in for gas. Now, in working for Beaufort Fisheries, we didn't have but one plane. So anytime the big boats was out, they had 3 big boats. On the beach, the plane went with the big boats, and we was kind of on our own in the sand.
Oh,
which
yeah.
that happened quite often.
Mm-hmm.
Quite often. But when power blocks come along, that pretty well replaced the dry boat.
Mm-hmm. Well, to stand up and row, wasn't it hard to keep your balance?
Not once you learned what you was doing, it wasn't. You never stood flat-footed. You put one foot ahead. You put your left foot ahead of the other, and your knees was kind of bent.
Did you like that job?
Oh yeah, I love that job. That was fun. That was fun. That was really a fun job. I practiced a year just learning how to row it before I ever got the job. So when I got the job, I could row it.
How'd you practice?
I would practice down here in front of Beaufort Fisheries in the cut days. I'd just row up and down that cut. And
how about that?
I said, I want this job, so I'm gonna get this part behind me. They were once you got the hang of standing up in one, it was okay. And I had a good friend of mine. That's what he done, and he showed me how to stand when you're rowing. And when you was rowing this way, you never let your weight get forward of the point of balance. You kind of use your arms and shoulders mostly.
Mm-hmm. And were these those little lap strake or whatever, double ender?
No, they were little square stern boats. They were built they weren't built like a regular skiff. They were built real beefy. They were built out of oak, and they had the same lines that probably a purse boat had, only instead of having the 2 sharp ends, the stern was square. But it was not lapstick. Everything was same fitted.
And who built those?
They were built different places. They built a lot of them in Reedville, Virginia. They built a lot of them over here at Bell Wallace Shipyard, and Mr. Wallace was half owner in that. They were built different places.
Where was that Wallace Shipyard, in Beaufort?
No, it was in Moorhead, right there where the yacht base, where all the yachts tie up at. And
that's right.
Right there.
Okay, so you moved your way up the ranks.
Up the ranks. I rode dry boat 2 or 3 years. I don't know exactly how long. And then my uncle needed a mate. my grandfather, he was mate with him, and he decided he'd go back in the Gulf with his son. So the mate's job come open, and I got that. I think that's probably the nervousest I've ever been in my life. First time I ever steered the first boat around.
Oh.
I was so nervous. I don't know what I'd done. I don't even hardly remember the set. I was so nervous.
Wow.
I was so scared I was going to do something wrong. It was right in the Banks Channel. Caught about 75,000 fish. I remember it just like it was yesterday. But I went mate with him. That was in '61. It was no fish in the Sound that year at all. Very few on the beach. I had just bought a new '61 Ford on a Econoline, $2,400. And by halfway through the summer, I told him, I said, Uncle Benny, I've got to go in the Gulf. I've got to make some money. I don't want to lose my car. So he said, go ahead. He had another man on race. He said, you go on down and go with Leo Ivy. That was his brother, my grandfather. So I went to Sabine Pass, Texas in 1961. I started my career in the Gulf.
Ah.
I went down with Uncle Leo and Papa. Leo was captain, Papa was mate. On the Alabama. On a small wooden boat. She carried about 350,000. And I stayed with him 6-7 years. Done different jobs. Went pilot, went mate. And we transferred from Sabine Pass to Dulac for Wallace M. Quinn Menhaden. He was the oldest company there. And we fished there for several years. That's where I met my wife. That's where she's from, Louisiana.
She is?
She was working in the office. And we stayed there until O.W. Burton, out of Port Arthur, Texas, built a factory and 6 big boats, 1.5 million boats. And we left Mr. Quinn, who was on the point of shutting Dulac down. He was getting a lot of age. He was in his 80s then, so he was kind of phasing himself out of the business. And we started with O.W. Burton on them big boats. Me and my uncle, Leo. He went pilot on one, I went pilot on the other. And the next year he got a big boat and I got a big boat. That was my first big boat. Rachel Burton.
And you're a pilot?
I went over there as pilot. And he did too. Of course, he had been captain, but he took the pilot's job. Both of us knew we could get boats over there if we ever got in the company. So that's what we done. We went ahead and I went pilot and he went pilot.
And what's the job of a pilot?
Pilot, more or less, is in charge of the boat when the captain's off in the first boats. Most of the time, the captain and the pilot will share the steering, like if they're going to run. On a Sunday night, if you've got to run 8-9 hours, the captain will steer. And then when he lays down, most time by 10:30, 11 o'clock, you get up and you run the boat to where he wants to go. And then as you start fishing, he'll drop off and make a set, and you take the steamer and you ease alongside the first boats to bail the fish.
Okay.
And help him look for feast days in the wheelhouse.
And so what's the job of the mate?
A mate, he goes in the other, you got the 2 purse boats, and he goes in the mate boat, captain, the captain boat. And he makes half the set just like the captain. And he's kind of in charge of his boat. And the captain's in charge of his boat as far as getting the net back, keeping the pockets out of it, keeping everything straight. In the latter years, a lot of the mates hire some of the men. A lot of the captains still hire their own crews. But some captains prefer that the mate hauls them. And the mate also, he's in charge of keeping the fishing gear up, changing purse line, mending on nets. A lot of people go mate, and that's their last step to go captain. Mm-hmm. That's most time when you get to the mate, the next step is to go captain.
So what year did you first go captain?
I went captain, let me back up just a little bit. I went captain 1 year for Willis and Quinn. That was probably in 64. And worked out of that year. No, I'm wrong. 65. Well, the following year, that's the year we went with O.W. Burton. With Terrebonne Menhaden. That was the first name of that company.
What was the name of it?
Terrebonne Menhaden.
Oh, like Terrebonne Parish?
Terrebonne Parish.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah. All right.
That's Terrebonne Parish.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I got to Rachel Burton in 1968. That's when I started fishing a big boat. And stayed there 35 years. Fished right there at that one place.
How about that?
And I never dreamed that plant would ever close down, but it did. Mm-hmm. Fished there a long time in Louisiana.
Did you like it down there?
Oh, yeah.
Was the fishing different?
A little bit of difference. Not no great deal of difference. The biggest difference in fishing out of Dulac and fishing up here was you had the big boats and you didn't come to the factory every night because you had such a long run. You had a 10-hour run to the plant. Where on the East Coast, 4 or 5 hours at the most. Of course, now when they got the big boats, they started running further. So a lot of nights, instead of running in to unload maybe 500 or 600, we would just anchor and lay there until we got a pretty good load.
Okay.
You averaged on real good fishing to do like you'd come in about twice a week. You just had so far to run that you lost so much time.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said you were nervous the first time you were a pilot. How about the first time you were a captain?
Not really. I wasn't that nervous about going captain. I guess I had a little more confidence in myself than I had when I was, first time I went mate, that's what it was. But I guess I knew a little bit more about what I was doing. Mm-hmm. A little bit older. Don't get me wrong, I knew it was a lot depending on that job, that break that I got getting that boat. I had a wife and had a little girl who is now 43, and I knew I had to make it.
Uh-huh.
Because we had to have a house. We didn't have a house. We were staying with Mother and Daddy. But I wasn't so much nervous in catching the fish like I was when I went mate that time. I knew I had a lot on my shoulders.
Right.
A lot of nights, a lot of sleepless nights, rolling and twisting, wondering how everything's going to turn out. And always, when you first start, you don't get a real good crew. The crews like to go with the proven captains that's, catching the fish, and you kind of had to prove yourself to everybody. And the more fish you catch, the better men you get. And I was a new kid on the block, and it was a couple, 3 years, it was tough. It was really tough.
And you don't want to be the low boat.
No. Companies they'll give a young man a boat, and they figure the first year it's kind of trial and error year. But if you hang around the low boat too long, you'll wind up without a job.
Yeah.
But, they've got a lot of money invested in these boats.
But somebody's always got to be low.
Somebody's always got to be low. Somebody's always got to be high. But your fish catch is what keeps your job. If you don't have a good fish catch, they're going to find somebody that can have a good fish catch. I mean, it's just that simple. Especially when we started working with all the individuals, the families that was owned these businesses and got out of it and sold to the stock companies. And it's bottom line is profit with the companies this day and time, has been for the last 25, 26 years.
Oh yeah, that's right. You've seen that transition from family-owned
to family
corporate.
to corporation.
Hmm.
And that's a different ballgame. Different ballgame.
Yeah.
We knew all the families owners knew us. Ain't like that now. You've got these guys that step in as head CEOs, all he's interested in is the bottom line.
Maybe doesn't even know much about fishing or anything.
Most time they don't.
Yeah.
Just knows business.
Uh-huh.
Just knows business. I guess considering everything, all the families probably had to get out of it due to financial problems or due to the fact they was getting too old to run it themselves. But sometimes I wonder about so many people. We've just gone through a transition of people in Omega. I know they're very intelligent. They got good business heads, but they do some things sometimes that I scratch my head over and wonder. And they have to learn. They have to learn. They don't think they do, but they have to learn the business. They'll come in and say, you don't need this, you don't need that, you don't need this, but a lot of times they take it away and it comes back to haunt them, so you go right back to the same old thing once they pick up on the business.
Yeah.
It gets a little easier, but everybody dreads a new CEO.
Oh.
I mean, it's keeps everybody on pins and needles.
I bet. Well, has it been a trade-off? Do you get better benefits with the corporation?
Yeah. Big companies, yeah. Yeah, it's, they can come up with the capital to keep the boats in good shape. Most of them have insurance. That's good, especially this day and time.
Oh, yeah.
Insurance is so high. And they have a lot of things benefit-wise. They have the 401s and everything for a young man that wants to, get in stuff like that.
So, would you say that being captain is the most stressful job?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Now, why is it?
Because it's all on your shoulders. You got the crew. You're responsible for maintaining a good fishing crew, even though the mate helps you. You're responsible for the boat. You have an engineer who runs the engines, and that's kind of, he takes care of that, but still, you're responsible for it. And now the Coast Guard is really tightening up on a lot of different things. Ever since this 9/11, we've seen a different environment with the Coast Guard. They're checking the boats more, and everything falls back on the man that has the license, which is the captain. You have an accident, don't matter whether you're asleep or not. I mean, if some guy runs in you, then you do everything you can to prevent it. That's still your responsibility.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And how about towards the crew? Does the captain have the responsibility of making sure finding the crew, keeping the crew together?
Yes. My philosophy on that was I always figured I had to do it myself. That way I knew where else to do it. I mean, I had some just as good a mates as ever lived. But I still wanted to keep a hands-on with the crew. Always figured if I knew the men, if I hired them, man worked out good, I was pleased. But if a man didn't work out, if I hired him, no one else had made him no promises. If he couldn't produce like the rest of the men, then I would replace him. As long as he was trying, I was very willing to work with him. But if you got someone that just didn't want to work, then I didn't have to. I would always talk to the mate about it. We always try to make a joint decision. But like I say, a lot of captains don't do that. A lot of them just let the mate hire them in. This day and time, it's very hard to find a good crew. Mm-hmm. Very, very hard. When I started fishing back in '58, everybody was trying to get on a boat. Because at that point in time, you can make a little money, you know. Your pay was as good as anyone else's. And no one in those years went to college unless their family was well off. No one could get other than a high school education. So we had a lot of people that wanted to fish, that had the potential probably to go to college, either the white and the black community. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't available. Now you've got all this community colleges, and you know, everybody can get a good education. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of different things, a lot of different fields for people to go in, other than around here what it was back in those years.
Right. Yeah.
And it's really hard, and the pay is not kept up with everything else in the country. That's a big problem. Mm-hmm. You know, it's hard to hire a good man if he's got family. He's got a truck, his wife's got a car, he's got to make some money. But all of it together can be pretty frustrating at times, trying to keep a good crew of men. And that you've got to have. If you don't have a good crew, I don't care how good a boat you got or how good a captain you are, you will not succeed. You've got to have good help. Mm-hmm. Just like anything else, you've got to have good help.
Where did you find your crew?
I carried a crew from Harlowe for a number of years.
Really?
Those guys fished up there. They stayed in the business. They worked around factories. And I got a man to go with me that still fishes right there where I'm at now, in Moss Point. His name was Lee Morris. Very good mate, but mate with me about 12 years. And he lived to Harlowe. And that's where I had the first real good crew I've ever had, was up there, from Harlowe.
That's something.
And he stayed with me, and he went to Moss Point. Started fishing out of Moss Point, and I was still in Dulac. And I hired a mate from Monroeville, Alabama, Billy Peoples. Dead and gone now, bless his heart, he was a good man. And I kind of shifted to the men from Monroeville. And that's where I carried a crew from out of Monroeville for a long time. Mm-hmm. Right on until they shut Dulac down. That's where I had my men from, Monroeville, Alabama.
Hmm. And was that very far from Dulac?
It was 7 hours.
So how did you find, why there?
Well, that same gentleman that I had mate, Billy Peoples, he started fishing. I guess he was probably one of the earlier men that lived in Monroeville and started fishing. That started going mate. So he introduced a lot of good men to the fish business. I would say 2/3 of the men that worked at Dulac, that's where they were from. And I'd say half of that 2/3 he trained, he hired himself. He got them in the business.
Okay. And I've also thought it's interesting that so many of the men that work the factories and the boats are all the way from Harlowe.
Mm-hmm.
That's a distance.
But that's, for years and years, that's where, you know, people that run, they were excellent. Excellent fishermen and also excellent to run the factory. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had people right down here at Beaufort Fisheries that, you know, they run the complete factory. Monroe Simpson told me, he was plant manager at the time, he said, and had the reputation of being one of the best plant managers it was in the business. He said, my success is the people I have. Aww. He said, I got people that have been working here 30 years. He said, I can go home nights and lay down, I ain't got to worry about it. And 9/10 of them were from Harlowe.
That's something. So what do you think now that the last factory here has been sold and is getting torn down and there's no industry right here in Beaufort?
To me, it's a shame. It's a good fisheries here. It's abundance of fish here now.
Yeah.
I guess the fish factories don't fit in with everything else that's around here now, with all the condos and all the tourist business, the bad odors that don't bother us at all, but I'm sure maybe it is offensive to the people that come here for the holidays in the summertime. But it just don't seem like the same place to me. It's just so different without the Menhaden business here. Mm-hmm. It's very sad to think of all the families down through the years that what food they eat on their table come from Menhaden business. And to me, it's very sad.
Yeah, and it was sort of the flavor of the town to have that fish factory
It
there.
was. Everything depended on it. Everything depended on it. The merchants in Beaufort, the fuel docks, everything. Mm-hmm. Everything depended on it. Although it changed, it scaled down a lot. I've seen high as 60, 70 boats fishing out of Beaufort and Moorhead in the fall of the year, from November through December, 2 months. And that's, like I say, that's where the merchants made their money. The dry goods stores, they sold clothes to people that come from other places. You know, they spent money here. They made money here and they spent money here. I know the Virginia boats, a lot of them come from Virginia. When they would cut out, when they leave, it would be 12, 15 bicycles on their decks where the crew had bought for their children, or you could see their stuff that they had bought was carrying back to Reedville. And it was good times.
Yeah, it must have been a real atmosphere of...
The whole thing was really exciting, you know. The streets was always full of fishermen. Vic's pool room, everybody was in our shooting pool. All people from other states that come down on the boats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so today is November 18th. If we could turn the clock back 50 years, it'd be all cranking right now.
Yeah. Yes, sir. They would be going full steam.
Mm-hmm. So, you fish in the Sound, you fished offshore in the Atlantic, you fish in the Gulf. What's your very favorite place to fish?
Well, I like to fish the Dulac because that's where I first started on a big boat, started being productive. I guess I would have to say Dulac for me. Now the fishing up here in the fall was real nice, a lot of fun, a lot of fish. rough weather, very, very, very risky, very risky. Very treacherous place up here, and especially in wintertime.
Did you ever get in a tight spot?
Oh yeah, yeah.
What's the worst experience you had out there?
The night the Amagansett sunk, and the night the Fenwick Island sunk.
Was that the same night?
No. It was about 10 years difference.
Okay. What boat were you on?
The night the Amagansett sunk, I was on the Texas with Captain Berkeley Simpson.
Uh-huh.
The night the Fenwick Island sunk, I was with Charlie Pittman on the Menhaden. This is probably the roughest place. It is on the eastern seaboard, from Hatches, back this way. You've got the shoals, your Cape Lookout shoals, Hatchery shoals, a lot of current, and weather is very unpredictable. You really got to pay attention. Really got to pay attention. If you don't, you'll pay the price.
Do some of the Louisiana captains that have come up here get a surprise because it's not what they expected?
Most of the captains that fished in the Gulf, other than Peck Humphrey's captains, about half of his captains that fish in the Gulf would come up here to Beaufort and fish in the fall, but they was originally from Virginia.
Okay.
But it wasn't too many Gulf captains come up this way.
Yeah.
They would usually make the season down there, unless the company insisted on it. If they had boats that they sent up here every fall, then that was part of the job. But 90% of the Gulf fleet, when the season was over down there, they just stayed there. Because the companies that owned them had boats to Virginia, and boats right on to Montauk Point, Long Island. So they just let them boats come to Beaufort instead of the boats out of the Gulf. Once or twice, the Smiths sent in my career, a bunch of boats out of the Gulf up here.
Okay.
But not on a regular basis. They would always let their East Coast boats come to Beaufort. They had the one big factory over at West Beaufort. They'd have 30, 40 boats down here for that one factory.
The night the Fenwick Island went down?
Fenwick Island.
Where did she go down?
She went down east of the Knuckle Buoy about 4 miles.
And what year was that?
I was reading that report that the Coast Guard had wrote the other day. Steve sent it to me. Late. I can't remember right offhand.
Yeah, it's not on here. Yeah, because Steve does have a list.
Yeah.
I was thinking that was the list, but it's not. So what boat were you on that night? You already told me, but
I was on the Lynn Ann.
The Lynn Ann. So that was the steamer, the wooden steamer?
Wooden hull boat.
Were you offshore?
Mm-hmm.
So what happened?
Well, we was ahead of the other boats. We'd fished up around Hatches that day, and we got lucky. We got a couple of good sets, and we got about 650. So we come on down. We left. We was down to the Knuckle before dark. It was getting awful rough awful rough. And majority of the fleet fished up there until late that evening. And by the time they got down to the Knuckle, it was rough, real rough. But what got the Fenwick Island in trouble, when the wind struck, it was a good 60, 70 knots. He was on the west side of Cape Lookout, whereas the boats that was behind him, I know we had a couple of boats that we called and told them to go up back to the lighthouse. Don't try to come around. But he had already got on his side, so he'd got to the point of no return. He had to come in Beaufort. He couldn't turn around. It was a good friend of mine was fishing that boat, Charlie Lee Foster from Virginia. And it was just too too much sea for the boat to survive. And he had a lot of different problems, which, nothing goes right when it gets real rough. If especially if you lose a boat, most times you got a lot of bad weather, and then little things create big problems and problems and problems. And I think it got so rough that it washed one of his first boats out to David's. Well, I give a report list, and by the time they got ready to lower that away, she just turned over.
Oh no! Did the boat go down with everybody?
Yeah.
It did?
Oh no, all of them didn't get drowned. It was another big boat, one of Reed Royal's boats right there with him, and he picked up, I think 7 got drowned.
Gosh.
But he just happened to be right there by them with that big boat and was watching them and seeing the whole thing. So he just eased up in the area, and they started throwing lines overboard. And by the grace of God, got, most of them. But you probably had a crew of 14, 15 men. 7 of them did get drowned.
Can you imagine seeing something like that unfold before your eyes?
It's a bad thing. Bad thing.
So have you had anything unusual happen while you're fishing? Did anything unexpected come up in the net?
The worst thing I've ever had any dealings with in a net was, I don't know if you're familiar with what they call a swordfish, sawfish. You ever seen the saw of one of them things?
Yes.
I caught one of them one time. That thing must have been 10, 12 feet long. I thought he tore the net all to pieces. And that saw would get tangled, and we'd grab him up with a power block, and he was fighting, for dear life. And that was probably the strangest thing I've ever seen in a net.
Yeah.
I had that happen one time, and that was enough.
Was he sawing the net?
He was tearing the net all to pieces. We'd pull him up. His saw was tangling when he was so strong. I was surprised at the strength of him. He was giving us a fit. We were trying to get rid of him, and he was trying to get rid of us. But in the process, we finally, I don't know how we even got rid of him. I know he tore that net up pretty bad.
Was he worse than a shark?
Yeah, by far. By far. A shark will bite a hole in the net. They'll eat them up if you get in a school of them, eat the net up. But at least they're not hanging halfway in the first boat with everybody.
Yeah.
And he slatting that big saw out on the end of his nose. Got teeth about every 3 inches. Sticks straight out. It looks just like a chainsaw. I've always said that's where they got the idea of a chainsaw from. Was that what we call a sawfish?
Talking about the power block reminded me. So you must remember that transition before, from pulling by hand to the power block.
Mm-hmm.
And back when the men used to sing to pull the fish.
All the men sing, yeah.
Yeah, did you get in there and sing
Oh,
with
yeah.
them? Did you?
Yeah. Got right in there with them. Everybody had to, if you wanted to fish.
Uh-huh.
It took everybody.
Did that help the work?
Yeah.
How so?
Well, it was all set up to get everybody to pull at one time. Get each man to pull at one time. But it was something else about it. Even today, sometimes, I'll kid with the fellows. If they got a good set, I'll sing. Part of a shanty will come back to me, and I'll sing it on the radio. Just be doing something. But it was something about those shanties. It would make the hair rise up on the back of your neck. You felt like you could pull 4 times as much as you could, but when they wasn't singing it. I don't know whether you really could or not, but it felt like you could. It really got the adrenaline flowing. And it was just something about that. That was to me, that was the highlight of a big set, was singing those chanties. And it was my neighbor over here who's dead and gone now, bless his heart, Captain George Lewis. He's a small man. Fished down here for Potter, fished in the Sound for years. That's the only place he ever fished. And he told me one time, he said he felt like when he sung the shanty, he could shove his feet right through the side of the first boat. He weighed about 125 pounds. Biggest he ever was. So he just felt like he could pull a net to pieces. You know, that's the way it affected him. That's the way it did me too. I have some on a tape. They're not clear. Of actual shanties and being sung on boats. I wish I had some real good copies of that, you know, on CD or something. Now the boys that sung the shanties around, that's good, but it's not the same.
Right.
It's not the same.
Yeah.
It's something. It's something that's not there. I can't explain it, but it's just. But that kind of stuff is really hard to come across now. It's few recordings. One made down in Ferndale, one made up to Crab Island, New Jersey. They were put on records, and by the time I got my copy of it, which it was a family had the records, they were so scratched up, it was a lot of noise, you know. But you could still hear everything pretty good.
So what was that transition like when the power block came along?
It speeded everything up. It speeded everything up. When you got a good set of fish, everybody was working as hard as they could. If you got 25,000, no matter how good a crew you had, people just didn't. You didn't have nothing in the net, so you weren't really excited about it. What you didn't have to worry about it was the power block. The power block had no emotion. All you had to do was open the engine up. You know, it was going to do the same thing. That was the biggest thing. And I guess for the companies was reducing the size of crews. They went from we just got 32 head of men on the big boats, and they cut their crews down to either 16 or 17 when they introduced the power block.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
So that big reduction in people.
Well, did you notice how strange it was when you started using the power block? There was no more singing? Or did people keep singing for a while?
No, because by the time the power block come out, we started using, instead of hardening the fish by hand, we started using the what they call a hardening rig, which was using cables to go to the head of the mast to pull the net up to harden the fish by power.
Oh, when you're back up at the big boat.
Yeah. When you come alongside with a steamer, instead of hardening the fish by hand, you just throw a line out and got a hook with a steel cable to it, and we had winches that just hoisted the net up the mast. So that pretty well eliminated all the shanties and everything.
Did that come before the power block? That hoist? Same time?
About the same time. About the same time. Because Marco off the west coast, they introduced the power block to our business. And we used the Marco, we call them strapping winches. So it come out about the same time. The captain that introduced that was John Larry, a guy from Virginia. He figured that out. And just so he figured it out, then the whole business went just like that, the whole industry. You know. Well, a lot of times, you know, when you got a big set of fish, you didn't get them. Your net would tire up, or you just had too many fish that you couldn't handle them, you couldn't harden them. You just had too much weight, especially off here in the fall of the year in this deep water. And so that was a lot of help, a lot of help.
Yeah, I bet.
A lot of help.
And so before that winch, that was really when people were working hard to harden the net, right when the vessel was there, and then dip the fish out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, see, the power block, the hardening rig, and what we call the fish pump all come out about within 5 or 6 years. We used to dip them with the net. Well, we started using the centrifugal pumps with a 10-inch rubber hose. We just drop that in the net and just suck them out it by power. So all that happened within 5 or 6 years. So it changed the business a lot. It really changed it a lot. It made it a lot easier. I know that. A whole lot easier.
Yeah.
You didn't have that physical strain all the time, and it was a really nice thing.
Yeah, and about that time, where did the spotter pilots come in?
Spotter pilots started in the 50s. That's about the time they started up on Chesapeake Bay.
So maybe a little bit before all that other stuff.
Yeah. Now it was one gentleman, Hall Waters, that they always said that he was the first fish spotter that lived down in Southport. Of course, they had a factory there for years and years and years. And I've heard someone say that he started in 48 after he come out the military. Oh. I guess he learned how to fly in the military. Now, how he got to looking for pogies, I have no idea. I know the first one we had here was Jesse Taylor for Beaufort Fisheries. In my fishing career, I think they had maybe a couple of guys before that maybe they would just help out in the fall when fishing was real heavy.
Oh, was Jesse the one that was in an accident?
Jesse got killed. Jesse got killed in 1958. 59. He was hit by a jet over Newport River. He was a local boy. I think the boat that I was on, the Corsair, with my Uncle Benny, he was captain of it. I think we was probably the last one to talk to him. We was uptown. We had to get fuel uptown then. They didn't have no fueling stations at the factory. Well, the potters on the factory and the potters on the fuel dock, so you know how that goes. So we'd go uptown maybe once, twice a week and fuel up, come on back to the factory. And we was up there fueling up, and I think Uncle Benny asked him to check out Newport River. And we seen, he said okay, and then we seen a big puff of smoke over there. And apparently that's when that jet hit him. We never did hear nothing else about it. We headed back to the factory. When we got to the factory, we found out that the jet had run into him.
Oh my gosh. Was that from a military jet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a military one out of Cherry Point. I don't know what happened. They usually keep track up on radar pretty good, but I guess something. Was
Jesse young?
Yeah, Jesse had to be. He couldn't have been over 40. He couldn't have been over 40. He was Gordon Earl Taylor's boy. I don't know. You probably don't remember Earl Taylor. He was quite a big farmer around here. He's dead and gone now. He was his son.
Did you, when the spotter pilots started, did you notice the fishing process becoming a lot easier where you didn't have to find the fish yourself?
It was. You caught a lot more fish because they had such a better view of everything. And they could see fish when you couldn't see them from the masthead. They'd be deep down in the water where they had, if they were flying at 2,000 feet, you could see down in the water. And it made the industry more productive.
That's right.
Yeah.
Did you, do you still find the fish yourself sometimes without the spotter pilot?
Oh, yeah. In the Gulf especially. They do a lot of fishing in the Gulf on their own.
Really?
Right there where we fish at Moss Point. Do a lot of fishing on their own there.
So they still get up in the crow's nest?
No, not really. They'll stay on deck level, wheelhouse level, but it's a place, due to the fact we're so close. Excuse me just a minute. I had a Coke in here. You care for a Coke or something?
No, I'm fine, but I appreciate it. All right.
Due to fishing so close to the mouth of that river, we have so much muddy water and red water that we fish on what we call whipping fish. They'll just pop their tails. Instead of a lot of the places they look for color, the density of the school, but the water's so thick down in Britain Sound that you very seldom see the color. You always see the whips.
Oh.
So you can see them about as good as a plane can. But on west of the river, most of your fishing is done by the planes. Pretty well dependent on the planes.
Well, to kind of sum things up, what have you loved best about being in this industry all these years?
I guess doing what I'd always wanted to do and staying into it, and just the fact that I've always made a living and made it doing just exactly what I love to do. Let's catch pogies. Steve Goodwin told me one time, he said, you're one of the few people that's made a good living and never regretted a day that you've done it. He said, I worked at Cherry Point for 20 some odd years and hated every day of it.
Oh, gosh.
I said, yeah, and I guess that would I guess that's what I love about the business. I just always wanted to do it, and I'm still doing it.
Yeah.
Still doing it. Still love to do it. Still miss it. Wish I was doing it today.
Well, so now you're running the Frosty Morning as a run boat. And how many fish did you say she holds?
Yeah, 2.5 million.
2.5 million. That's huge.
That's huge. She's 195 feet.
That's the biggest vessel?
That's the biggest fish boat that's ever been built.
And she's not young.
No, she's not young. She was built in 1958.
Gosh.
But she's had it is no telling how much money that boat has made at different for different companies.
How about that?
I would just love to know the amount.
Yeah. And so could you tell me, how does it work to be a run boat?
A run boat, we leave the factory, we get the fish report just like the regular captains, and planes will say recommendation, just like where we fish at, Britain Island Ship Channel. Well, we run to that area and we drop the anchor at night, and we lay there, and we try to stay within 5 or 6 miles of the boats. If you start moving around, if they shift locations to a different location, we'll get our anchor and go where they're at. And if it's good fish, most of the time, if a boat gets, he has to have 500,000 before he can unload on a run boat.
Is that a rule?
Okay. That's a rule by the company to try to keep. One guy putting 300. It's got real competitive when we first started it, nobody wanted it, but all of a sudden they seen where they could make an extra $25,000 a year by using a run boat, so everybody wants to use a run boat.
Because now they don't have to go all the way back to the factory.
Right, and so especially on the Frosty, she carries so many fish, a man can fish that morning, and if he's got 500 or 600 or 700 in an hour and a half, we can have him off, and he's got a light boat. Britain Sound, where we fish at, is very shallow. And the best fish is up on the west side, and that's the shallowest side of the sound. So you really had to have a what we call a light boat with no fish on it to get in there. You can get you 700-800, and you got to get out because of the tide and the waters are so shallow.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll come on the Frosty. He'll come unload 500,000 or 600,000, 12, 1 o'clock when things slow down. Midday, you get the midday blahs down there. They'll fish or go in shallow water mornings, and evenings they'll come back off.
And it's hot.
And it's hot. So he comes, he puts his fish on us, and he goes back fishing that evening, and he comes back that night or the early part of the evening, and he'll put the rest of his fish. If he puts 500,000 in the hole of the Frosty, well, each hole will hold 1,200, but no one else can put fish in that hole unless it's a gentleman's agreement between the two captains and the run boat captain. And sometimes they even get the plant manager involved in it. Because then they have to say, well, I think I've got 500. And the other guy said, well, I think I've got 4. Well, you mix them like that, but you have to have agreement between the two captains that you're going to do that.
Okay.
So once he puts that 500,000 in that hole, then he's got the right to keep that fish hole the rest of the day. When you go to the factory that night, you get them off, you come back and start the same thing all over again.
Oh, okay, so he could come back and finish filling that hole.
He can come back and put whatever fish he's got left, or he can fill it, which is about 12.50 in each hole.
So you're not the only run boat?
No.
Okay.
We have 3 run boats. We have the Diamond Reef and the Grand Isle, which are smaller boats. But we have 3 run boats to Moss Point and 8 catch boats, which has really worked out. It has really brought Moss Point out of kinks, I think.
Mm-hmm.
When we got the Frosty and brought her over there, she was just a regular fish boat, and I went on her, went captain over, and we trial and error, rigging her up, doing this, trying that. We finally got everything set up so we could unload the fish fast. And I've noticed since then the fish catching been, increasing in Moss Point.
Mm-hmm.
Now don't get me wrong, we've had more fish, and a lot of other stuff has improved because as your factory gets more fish, then it gets more money to spend. That type of deal with these, if you get 100% of plan, then the next year, when they set the budget, well, if a individual factory is meeting its plan every year, then they'll increase the plan, give you more money. Give the general manager of that factory more money to operate on, so he can improve everything.
So the run boat just stays anchored.
He stays anchored.
They come to you.
Right.
And then you just put the pump over and the winch just like you were.
No.
Oh.
We unload the fish off the fish boats just like the factory does. He comes alongside. He comes up to our starboard side. We're anchored. He comes up to our starboard side and we tie him off. We have a suction hose on the starboard side that we swing over.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a standpipe that goes down through his deck. We put that hose, it has a lip with a hydraulic claw on it, and it clamps around that lip so it don't suck air.
Oh. On the bottom of the hole?
On the bottom of the standpipe.
Okay.
Pipe comes up 10 inches, goes out about 2 inches.
And you can find that in all that fish?
Goes right down in it. And we have another pump, a 10-inch pump. What we use to unload these fish to keep them from deteriorating is our refrigerated water.
Okay.
So that's something else we have to try to keep. We keep enough water on the run boats to offload the catch boats. So we just recycle that cold water. And we keep our refrigeration going the whole time we're unloading. So it keeps the water cold. So the fish don't go through what we call a heat. We have to have a good product to even sell it this day and time.
Right. And so do you get to go home every night?
No. I leave here in April. I don't come back no more until November.
No, I mean when you're working as a run boat. Every evening?
No. You go in. If you unload fish until dark, you won't get to the factory next morning till daylight. And just when you get your fish out, you go right back.
Okay, so you can pretty much count on you're going to be on that boat all week.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The only difference in us and the regular boats is they fish through Friday. We go through Thursday. When we come in Thursday night, due to the fact most time we can't get back to them. By the time we get our fish out Friday, we just call it a week. Sometime we'll go back if we got a boat close up in Mississippi Sound, which is 2 hours away. But if the boats are in Britain Sound, you're looking at 8-9 hours running time.
Oh.
So you can't get back to them.
And how many crew do you have on a run boat?
5.
Oh, so when you said that, you felt like you're getting older and this is a better job for you, why is it easier?
Less stress of having not to have that big a crew, and trying to figure out where to be.
And I guess you don't have to actually jump in a purse boat and do all that.
Right. Right. That's exactly right.
Okay. All right, Captain David. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Not really, other than the fact it's been an enjoyable career for me, and hope that I can get a couple more years out of it.
Yeah, looks like you will. Are you going to keep fishing till you just can't?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I guess if things was like it was years ago right here, I would probably stay here and get on the boat. But that's over with, so that's out the window.
But you don't think about retiring?
Not really. Kind of scared of retirement.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how I'd handle it. I think last summer was my 52nd season, and you do something so long, it becomes part of your life.
Yeah.
And it becomes part of your wife's life. And she says she would either leave me or kill me if I stayed home all the time. I said, well, that's a two-way street now. You've been working for about 30 years now. I may feel the same way about you.
That's right. Suddenly you're both home all the time, looking at each other.
Looking at each other.
All right. Well, thank you, Captain David. I'm going to turn this off now.